Thailand sees its bloodiest shooting spree ever. A soldier shot dead after he had killed at least 26 people. The carnage ending at a city shopping center. Coronavirus deaths exceed those of the SARS outbreak from 17 years ago. More than 800 people have died, but health officials say the outbreak in China could be stabilizing. We'll speak to our correspondent. And the African Union meets today in a summit billed as silencing the guns. Governments are under pressure to end violent conflicts across the continent. Hello there, and thank you for joining us here on France 24. The death toll in Thailand has risen to at least 26. The Prime Minister has already been meeting with victims in the northeast of the country. Officials had congratulated security forces earlier after police shot dead a Thai soldier. Earlier, the man had reportedly killed his commanding officer, stole weapons from a military camp, and then entered a shopping center in the normally peaceful town and opened fire. At least 26 people were killed, a figure that could rise as dozens more are injured. Daniel Quinlan reports.
Unfortunately, the death toll has risen, and with 12 other victims who have been in surgery using some 64 units of blood so far, they're not out of the woods yet, and that figure could rise as well. I guess technically it's 27 if you include the gunman so far. The Prime Minister arrived in the town, which is about 3.5 hours drive from Bangkok in the northeast of the country. He flew into a military airport and then went around at least 3 hospitals, visiting some of the injured, some of the victims, and trying to provide comfort to them. He delayed having a press conference, but has recently just had it and spoken to the press. He basically praised, as you would expect, all the doctors and nurses who have been working around the clock now. The siege lasted some 17 hours, and that happened overnight here in Thailand. So he basically congratulated them. Also, one of the police officers who were involved and killed as they tried to capture or kill the gunman, he's also going to be promoted, and his family, they announced, will be given compensation.
Well, the death toll from the novel coronavirus surged past 800 in mainland China, overtaking global fatalities of the SARS epidemic from 17 years ago. Now, the epidemic prompted Beijing to put Hubei province on lockdown, effectively quarantining tens of millions of people. In many regions, far from that, are allowing only one person per household to go out every 2 days to buy supplies. For more, let's speak to our correspondent in Beijing, Charles Pellegrin. Charles, the World Health Organization said the outbreak appeared to be stabilizing in China. Is that the sentiment on the ground?
Well, on the ground, it's hard to tell. The situation's still pretty dire in the sense that life has come to a standstill here in Beijing, for instance. Not many people out in the streets, not many shops open or anything like that. The comparison that's really at the front of everyone's mind is that with SARS and this symbolic threshold that was crossed today with a higher number of deaths from this novel coronavirus compared to SARS, it has an impact on the Chinese population as well as on Chinese authorities. And to give you a sense of a comparison between the two, it seems like the novel coronavirus is not as lethal but more contagious. The mortality rate for SARS was around 10%, whereas for this particular illness it's around 2%. Although the number of people infected around the world is now over 37,000 people after the epidemic started close to 2 months ago, whereas SARS reached a total number of around 8,000. So those comparisons are often made, and also the response of the government was very different. The cover-up was much larger for SARS 17 years ago. This time around, there was a bit more transparency, even though there were quite a few issues in the first 2 weeks, and there's better infrastructure to deal with this kind of epidemic as well.
And Charles, many people returning to work this Monday. Is there a sense of life getting back to normal? Is that perhaps premature?
Life will go back to normal in a more gradual way. This Monday, still a lot of people will be working remotely. A lot of areas, a lot of local governments asking factories not to remain closed for another week, for another 2 weeks. Companies making their own decisions as well. Toyota in China has said that it would push back opening its factories in the country another week, citing a number of different concerns, especially with regards to the supply chain, because the whole province of Hubei is on lockdown. It makes it harder for the whole supply chain to work correctly. Another example is Apple, for instance. Apple stores in China will remain shut even if Apple employees will continue to work. There's a lot of people who can't go back to work because they're stuck in Hubei province. That's around 50 million people who are for whom it's really hard to leave that particular province. Another thing is that schools are still indefinitely shut down. We don't know when the school year will start again in China.
All right. Thank you very much, Charles. Charles Pellegrin reporting from Beijing. Well, 7 years ago, African leaders came together to try to get all wars to end on the continent by this year. That, of course, has failed. Now, the African Union holding a 2-day summit with a new goal. For more, let's speak to Mark Perlman, who's covering the event for France 24. Mark, this event's main topic is, quote, silencing the gun and tackling violence in regions.
Yes, indeed. This is the main topic of this year's African Union Summit here in Addis Ababa in Ethiopia, silencing the gun. It's essentially acknowledging the failure to do so. 7 years ago, this was supposed to be the end of the guns. 2020 was the deadline. We're there, and clearly the guns have not been silenced. Wars have been raging in several countries, in several regions, civil wars, open wars, bans, terrorism, and clearly this is a major problem. The South African President Cyril Ramaphosa will take over the presidency of the African Union for this year. This will happen in a few minutes after the opening ceremony, and he has already said that he would bring together an extraordinary summit of the African Union on terrorism. It's supposed to be scheduled in May. So clearly this is a big failure of the African Union. And this also means that those summits are essentially absorbed by security issues, by political disputes, instead of focusing on development, on health, on education, on solving humanitarian crisis. There's a major humanitarian crisis in southern Africa right now, but this is not at top of the agenda. We're hearing mostly about chaos in the Sahel and, of course, the other areas, especially Libya.
Yeah, Mark, mentioning Libya there, one of the concerns at the African Union is that it's been sidelined by the United Nations in discussing the conflict in Libya.
Yes, absolutely. Libya, once more, I should say, has taken front and center stage here at the African Union Summit because there have been a number of conferences in Berlin, in Geneva, and the African Union feels that it is being marginalized on this issue and it wants to have a bigger say. And so there is a push to hold a kind of reconciliation forum between all Libyans, not only the two major protagonists, the government of Fayez el-Sarraj in Tripoli and the strongmen controlling the east of the country, Marshal Haftar. Those have been the attempts made by the Western countries, by the UN. The African Union said, no, we need to change the method. We need to bring together all the protagonists, including members of the old Gaddafi regime, to try to find an African solution. We would like to have an African Union envoy in charge of Libya and not just a UN envoy. So there is a kind of anger here at the African Union because they say Libya is an African country. The Western powers are trying to impose a Western solution. Turkey is coming in. The Russians are coming in. This is not acceptable. We have to change the method to try to find a solution to this terrible crisis affecting not only Libya, but also the countries in the Sahel region.
All right. Thank you very much, Mark. Mark Perlman reporting there. We'll be following that summit throughout the day here on France 24. Thanks for watching, and please stay tuned.